I'm Daisy.
And I'm Terry.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 136.
As we get started with this episode, Daisy, I also wanted to take a moment to wish everyone a Happy New Year.
Indeed. Very Happy New Year. Happy start of 2023.
And as we head into the new year, we have some new episodes coming up. So let's get started with this one. This week, it's Daisy's turn to share something with us. Daisy, what do you have?
Well, Terry, this, I think I was trying to remember, and sadly, I didn't make a note of exactly where it came from, but I have a feeling it came to me via the Next Big Idea magazine newsletter, which I've mentioned a few times. They have a few different types of newsletter, and one of them is a book bites, where an author writes about their book, some key ideas. And I think maybe this is how I came across it. I'm not entirely sure, because probably I would have been writing about the article and I'm not. So who knows? It came from somewhere. But I ended up looking up this book. The book in question is The Power of Regret by Daniel Pink. And I went to have a look. I think I was thinking about buying it on Audible and listening to it. And I had a quick look through the first few reviews. And the first review said something along the lines of, "My biggest regret is wasting time reading or listening to this book when I should have just read the summary." So I thought, oh dear. Maybe I'll go look for a summary instead, or a podcast or a TED Talk or something like that. So I Googled it and up came a couple of things. And that is my very long-winded way of saying what I'm going to be talking about. So Daniel Pink has done a TED Talk called 4 Kinds of Regret and What They Teach You About Yourself. And the other video I found on YouTube was a summary that somebody else had done. It's called The Power of Regret, the core message, and that comes from the Productivity Game channel. And so it's one of those headlines that spoke to me. It's something that I've been mulling over a bit. I've become a little bit too, I don't know exactly what the word is. I get sort of too stressed out about regret and all this building work that's going on. I get very het up with feeling regret might be a bit too big a word for it, I guess, but really getting stressed out with trying to make the right decisions and then really ruminating and going over and over and over, punishing myself if I feel like I've made the wrong decision about something, putting something in the wrong place or whatever it is. It feels like this massive thing. So when I saw these videos about regret, I thought, well, this is something that maybe I need to learn a bit more about and maybe find ways of dealing with this sort of regret obsession cycle I seem to be getting into. So Daniel Pink is an American author who has written 7 books, 5 of which apparently are New York Times bestsellers. Little fun fact, between the years of 1995 and 97, he was the chief speechwriter for Vice President Al Gore. This book, The Power of Regret, he says that everyone has regrets. Regrets make us human. He says the only people who don't have regrets are 5-year-olds, people with brain damage, and sociopaths. So that was a good start for me. He said, basically, don't feel bad about having regrets. It's part of what makes you human. Okay, Daniel, I'm liking this so far. And he says, if we treat regrets right, they can make us better people. Okay, another tick. I'm liking this even more. They can improve our decision-making skills, our negotiation skills. They can make us better strategists and problem solvers. And they can enhance our sense of meaning. And For writing this book, the research he did, he asked lots and lots of people about their regrets. Apparently, he collected over 16,000 regrets. And he said that all these people that he spoke to, they kept expressing the same 4 regrets. So he came up with his 4 core regrets. The first one is foundation regrets. These are all about making choices that didn't allow you to have some stability. Might be financial, health, education. They're often a regret for not doing something earlier in life, and now we feel like we're paying for those choices. People with foundation regrets might say something like, if only I'd ... done the work, eaten better, worked harder at school. Foundation regrets. The second core regret is boldness regrets. And this is shying away from doing something. For example, there was a person I really liked, but I was too nervous about asking them out, and I've regretted it ever since. I've always wanted to start my own business, but didn't have the guts to do it. I wish I'd spoken up more, and so on and so forth. So with boldness regrets, you're likely to come to a juncture in your life and you've got 2 choices. You can play it safe or you can take a chance. And he says that people regret not taking the chance much more than taking that chance and it not working out. So if you take that chance and it goes wrong and you feel like you've made a mistake, you regret that less than not taking the chance in the first place. So boldness regrets get sums down into the if only I'd taken the chance. The third one, moral regrets. And again, you come to a juncture in your life where you either do the right thing or the wrong thing. Doing the wrong thing overall in his research was the biggest regret that tends to stay with people for a long time. And he cited an example of a woman who talked about, I think she was in her 70s, and she talked about this. One of the biggest regrets of her life was stealing sweets from a shop owner or something along those lines. Moral regrets. And that will boil down to, if only I'd done the right thing. And the last one, the fourth one, are connection regrets. Relationships that you have or ought to have that come apart. And he said most of these relationship breakdowns, they drift apart rather than an explosive rift. That tends to be the more common. The more common thing is that these relationships just drift apart. And people tend not to reach out because they think the other party won't care, won't be interested. And this boils down to the regret here is, if only I'd reached out. And so that was his starting framework. But why is he talking about these core regrets? Why did he think it was important to identify these 4 core regrets? He says they can operate as a sort of a photographic negative of the good life. He says, if we understand what people regret the most, we can understand what they value the most. Each of the regrets reveals something fundamental about humanity and what we need. So thinking back to the 4 different core regrets, we need stability. We want a chance to learn and grow and do something meaningful. We need to feel the exhilaration of doing something bold, of taking that chance. We want to do the right thing. Most of us, anyway. We want love and we want connection. And he maintains that looking at this more negative emotion of regret will point the way to a good life. And then the video goes into some examples they work with. This seems to be, it's some kind of a slightly different TED Talk. It was TED Talk membership or something. And they sort of had kind of like an audience phone-in participation. But basically, he talks through with people, talks the regrets through, and then pulls out what the lessons are that you can take away from it. and maybe behave differently moving forward, what you would maybe do next time. And he talks about his biggest takeaway being the connection regrets, and where people have drifted apart and feel awkward in reaching out and maybe fear rejection from the other person. And he says almost always the other person appreciates the gesture of reaching out. So if you get to that point and you're thinking, should I reach out or not? He says always reach out. That was his biggest takeaway. And to be honest, when he was talking to these people and talking through these examples, I didn't really feel that I understood all these differentiating the different core regrets, but I didn't really get how we can make use of them. So I switched over to this other video, the productivity game summary, and he seemed a little bit more putting it into practice. And it might be, of course, I've got all this if I'd have read the book, because he was really summarizing the book. So I'm sure these things that he talks about were talked about in the book. But the video that Daniel Pink had done with Ted, I wasn't really getting it from. But this guy talks about, again, he goes over the 4 core regrets, but he says that once you've normalized regret, you can then use it for a redemption story. He says that we forge our identities based on the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, and these apparently fall into 2 main categories: either contamination stories, which go from good to bad, everything went well and then it started to fall apart, or redemption stories, which go from bad to good. Something horrible happened, and then after some really hard work, it started to get much better. People who reflect more on contamination stories tend to be less happy and less accomplished in their careers. People who replay redemption narratives tend to be happier, more accomplished, and find more meaning in their lives. Why are we talking about these 2 different stories? Because, he says, regrets are the perfect starting point for a new redemption story. Looking into the regret you have about something you have done can then influence what you do now, which then goes on to influence your future. I regret X, but now I can do Y. So you get into this redemption story cycle where it goes from bad to good.
It seems like that's a really important part of this, that I'm not sure if I'm going to use the right phrasing for this, but that we don't just get stuck in the regret, that we see acknowledging the regret as a way to creating the redemption story, to creating the next step. And I think the danger for many of us is that we almost wallow or get stuck in the regret piece. And so this seems like a really important aspect of this whole concept of really being able to see, acknowledging our regret as an opportunity to move forward in another way, to build into the next thing that we want or how we want to be or whatever it is. This seems so important in this theory.
Yes, that's exactly it. And looking back on the discussions he had with these people who called in, that's exactly what he was doing. But this guy actually putting a theory around it, it made more sense to me. So yes, that's what he would do. The people who called in, he would ask them about their regret. They would talk about it. And then it was a case of, okay, so yes, what's the lesson we can pull out from this? We're not talking about it to ruminate on it and keep beating ourselves up. We're talking about it to try and pull the lesson out about, and then how can we apply that to what we do next. So I think one of the people who called in, she was talking about her regrets about, not speaking up. It reminds me of you saying you were quite shy to speak up in your lectures. Speak up and say, yeah, I'll do that. I'll take on that presentation or whatever it was. because you knew you had the skills to do it, and you regret now not speaking up because you know you could have done a much better presentation than the woman who spoke up and put herself forward, who was less skilled and had less knowledge and experience. And so he would have been trying to pull out, if you'd have shared that experience, was, okay, let's take that regret and I guess sit in the emotions you felt with that for a while, to learn from what you would do next time and to speak up next time. I don't know. I guess it just didn't, I don't know. I struggled with it a bit, but this other video helped, and you sharing your reactions to it helps a bit more with that. This guy, I'm not sure who he is. It's, as I said before, the Productivity Game channel. I'm not sure who he is, but in his summary of the book, he also talks about how regrets often still leave their mark even after you've done this redemption work. But he says this is not a bad thing. And he talks about regret residue. And he says this we can use for motivation to anticipate future regrets and build a life you're proud of. He talks about sending yourself an email every week. You're sending yourself an email from your future self. So you're anticipating what might appear under these 4 core regret headings. So basically you send yourself this template email, and under the 4 headings, you fill in these sentences. So under the first one, foundation regrets. I wish I'd taken care of my health this week by ... I wish I'd advanced my career by ... I wish I'd increased my savings by ... Second heading, boldness regrets. I wish I'd tried ... started ... asked ... You get the idea. Third heading, moral regrets. I wish I'd remained loyal to, been kinder to, stood up for. And the last one, connection regrets. I wish I'd reached out to, forgiven ... So you set up this email to yourself every week with this template and ponder how you'd fill in each one. And this, he says, allows you to prevent small regrets from turning into big regrets. And he says that what Daniel Pink found in all his research is that a whopping 2/3 of all regrets are regrets of inaction. And he sort of lays out this timeline. Maybe you do something silly, make a mistake, but you get to see the outcome. And then you have the chance of this redemptive action over time. However, the other timeline, do nothing, and you're just left wondering what could have been. And so that's it. I still feel like it's a little open-ended. I thought that was good practical advice. I honestly can't see myself doing it every week. As he was talking about it, I was, I don't know what it was. Was it my rebel self was pushing back saying, oh no, that feels like too much of a task to be doing every single week. But I thought, for me personally, yeah, that's something, that I could maybe do monthly or quarterly. That felt like a more sensible, for me, time frame, but quite a sensible thing to do. I quite like that. I quite like the template of going through. They might not all apply, but I quite like the notion of getting in there before these regrets really started to take hold.
Yeah, I like that piece of it, that it's almost like, and I felt myself bristling some too. It's like, oh yeah, that email would be so good. And I think other people should do that, but I don't want to have to do it.
I'm not going to do
it. Because for me, what it does is it's accountability. It's making you within a short period of time reflect versus, yeah, I've done some things in my life. It's almost like reflecting 30 years later versus I'm going to reflect right now. Because if I do, then I can start to make changes right now. Mm. And although that is inspiring, I think for me that's a little scary because it's almost like, oh, wait, if I identify these things, I might actually have to take action on them. But if I want to improve things, if I want these things to go better, it would be better if I reflected on it more frequently. And I think as I was listening to you describe it, and again, I'm not sure what phrase to use here for this, but I think I would need to write that email, answer those questions in that template to myself in a way that's not so judgmental. Yeah. Wish I had decided that. Wish I hadn't done this. Wish I had been more available to this person. Whatever. Without that meaning I'm a horrible person or I'm stupid or make bad decisions, that I could just own it as saying, just like if, let's say last night I went out for dinner, if I later said, yeah, I wish I'd only eaten 5 of those wings instead of 10. That was a lot. That's not a negative about me. That's just reflecting and using that data. So I think I would have to work on how to think through that email without taking it as personal, like damning myself for these things that I maybe didn't do in the ways that I'd want to, because now I get to do them again. I get to learn from them. But I know when I first heard you say it, I thought, oh, I don't want to have to admit all those things. But I can see where that would be really helpful.
Yes, it's definitely something that needs personalizing, I think. I think we both relegate it. It has elements of the to-do list, and we both have similar feelings toward to-do lists. You can't help but feel a bit judgmental of yourself when there are still so many items that you can't tick off that week that you've got to add to next week's to-do list because you didn't do last week's, and things like that. So I like the principles of it, but I feel it needs some work to individualize it. But I like the idea of getting in there a bit earlier. I'm a bit bad about putting my head in the sand for things I know I need to be thinking about, and just intentionally don't think about them, except part of my brain is thinking about them and stressing about them. And I only start consciously front of house, if you like, thinking about it when I absolutely have to, when there's a deadline coming up. Like I've got to sort my accounts out for the year and I'm approaching the deadline when I absolutely have to do it, or I'm going to have to start paying fines. Whereas it would be so much better to be doing that every month and, knowing how much tax has got to be paid and all the rest of it. But I think that's part of the realization for me, that you can put your head in the sand and not think about it, but a part of you is still thinking about it and getting stressed about it, which is, I wonder if maybe why some of these smaller decisions that feel like bigger decisions, why this whole regret thing is such a big thing. Keep saying thing, but a big thing for me at the moment. I don't know. It's just really been eating away at me, which is why this particular headline jumped out at me. I thought, well, maybe if I can learn something from it, other people can too. But I do like the principle of being able to take something that feels negative and turn it into something positive.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is, even though it sounds a little bit painful, is learning to look at things more immediately so that I can improve, so that I can feel better, so that I can like my decision next time, versus almost avoiding it, tucking it away, pretending it didn't happen, and just hoping miraculously things are going to go better next time. So it's really one of those examples where I'm cringing thinking about doing it, but I really think it could be really helpful to just own it and say, yeah, that didn't go so well. How do I want to do that now? I wish I could do that. All right. And start to see different possibilities rather than looking back for the next 18 months and still regretting that I made that choice or that I acted that way or whatever.
Yeah, and I think his point here is limiting the size of the regrets, I guess. If you do get in there early, your redemption story over that regret is that much easier, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Much easier to come back from a small financial overspend to 10 grand's worth of debt because you've been putting your head in the sand about it.
Right. Definitely a topic I'm going to have to look more into. And I might not do the email with all of those prompts. I might pick a few, a few key ones that fit for me.
Yeah, me too.
Well, thank you for sharing this, Daisy. I think it's a good way to start in the new year as well. Don't let those regrets pile up on us this year.
Sounds like a good way to start the year. I look forward to hearing what you've got to share next week. Until then, have a very wonderful week.
Take good care, everybody. Bye.